Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Wendy Eisenberg, a songwriter and improviser whose new album, Viewfinder, is out now on American Dreams. Conceptually underpinning this record is the fact that Wendy got LASIK, or laser eye surgery, back in autumn 2021. And the process of getting this, the healing, and all the reflections that kind of tumbled out of this experience are at the base of Viewfinder. And it's musically manifested in a way that goes in so many different directions. I mean, it's so much fun listening to this and drawing these lines of association as a listener. So the record rolls between improvisation and song form in a way that feels analogous to softening and sharpening focus. You have vocal doubling, which feels like double vision at points. You have these references within the lyrics, almost toying with the idea of vision in its multiple meanings. Artistic vision also feels like something that's being dabbled in here, and the idea of moving beyond the periphery of what can be preemptively seen. There's just a lot of play to be had here in listening to the record. And speaking of play, like, all the performances are incredible, including Wendy's own guitar playing. They are such a stellar guitarist. The dynamic feels really live throughout this record. And speaking to Wendy was wonderful. Like, they have such a playful and heartfelt way of articulating their connection with these 3 records in a manner that I think just makes me holistically appreciative of listening and trying to talk about it. Like, that's why this podcast exists. So I really felt like that this conversation brought me back to the root of why that's such a fun thing to do. So grateful to Wendy for instigating that experience for me. And I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If so, you can support it over at Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/crucial listening. There's a link in the show notes. You can donate monthly or one-off, any amount you please, or you can rate and review, or you can just listen and enjoy that way. I'm grateful for all of these things. Thank you so much. And okay, without any further faff from me, this is Wendy Eisenberg on Crucial Listening. Hello, Wendy. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on the podcast. So we're here to talk about your 3 important albums. Before we get to those, I want to talk about your new album, Viewfinder, released on American Dreams. So you got LASIK. I've heard both. What are we going with?
Around me, they say LASIK, but, you know, it's a really big world, and I wouldn't begrudge anybody an alternative.
Cool. Okay, we'll go with LASIK. So you got LASIK in autumn or fall 2021. You go into this a bit in the release text and also in the first track in the lyrics. But I want to ask specifically about the recovery, because it sounds like you go on a bit of a undulation with things getting clearer and then more blurry. And yeah, I thought I'd start there. So what was the recovery like?
So when you, immediately after getting the surgery, the place where I go drives you back to your place, because it's in Long Island, but a lot of people who receive the surgery there live in Brooklyn or Queens or Manhattan or something. So they have like a driving service. So you're like in a car with like some unlucky so-and-so driving you back. And you're supposed to keep your eyes closed the entire way. And you're supposed to sleep. And then when you wake up, you have sight, which is already so biblical and insane and kind of lush imagery-wise. But what it felt like for me is like, I couldn't resist the feeling. Like I had to keep my eyes open. The way that they drug you, like you can't be knocked out for it. You have to keep turning your eyes back and forth while they like do different aspects of the surgery, which is like pretty perfectly safe. And like, it's a very old surgery now, but you have to stay awake. So the kind of like, you're already awake when this insane thing is happening to you. And then you're encouraged to sleep. But I mean, after all that awakeness with this like unrepeatable image occurring in your eye, like to the end of you having sight, like it's like a vision that you chose and paid money to receive in this way. And then it becomes like vision. It was kind of irresistible to me to stay awake and see what the change would look like during which you're supposed to sleep. And I don't know if I don't think that messed with my recovery because I can see perfectly well right now, but it almost felt like finally, like the extremely wide or distant lens that I had on the world was like focusing, like there was an invisible hand that was adjusting the lens in each eye. So I just was walking around seeing my house like become clear to me, which is wild. But is that insane? I mean, it was so beautiful and again, unrepeatable. It's one of the, if people had told me that that's what it was like, I would have gotten it way earlier because people were just like, yeah, laser eye surgery, which is like a just horrible thing to imagine.
Right.
You don't know it's going to be like a psychedelic kind of dream, afterward. But the other thing is, since eyes, as we know, they degenerate as you age, a lot of times when you get LASIK, they overcorrect your eyes. So my eyesight wasn't 20/20. It was, I think, like 15/20, like some kind of insane, like better than normal eye thing. And so because of that, the light can enter your head a little bit deeper and than it normally can. I'm a little shaky on how it works, but what happens is with that greater access to light, the world becomes blurry because when you look directly into light, the world, it blurs out.
Yeah.
So like all of the healing process was about this like sharpening and then unfocusing and then focusing and unfocusing of vision.
Whoa. That is crazy.
Yeah. It is crazy.
Wow.
All right.
Right. So you had this experience, which, I mean, I was going to ask, I feel like you've answered it there, but did you have any inkling it was going to be like so profound?
I mean, I think I did because, sight is such a lush metaphor and it's such a underpinning of our culture. And by our culture, I literally just mean like the way that we narrativize discovery is about when you first lay eyes on something or like you're making eyes at someone. Like there's already, and it was something I was concerned about because I love music and I've been a really serious musician for like my entire adult life. When you're really focused on music, there's an element of you that's unquestionably devoted to sound and the somatics of sound and the phenomenon of sound, but the translation and the value and the way that we study it is all mediated by sight. If you're able to see. I mean, a lot of this stuff is like me situated as somebody who's not blind, but
right, yeah,
hearing songs like Amazing Grace, the idea of like divinity being or mysticism being related to sight, I had a sense that it would be so profound because it's just one of the primary ways that God or any interaction is mediated through language. We talk about vision and sight and visuality all the time, and so I had a feeling it would work. But when it's real, I mean, you can't. All of that stuff it's not on the level of the theoretical strictly. Like seeing something and being aware that you're seeing something is insane. And it's something that we do every single day. Maybe we forget that we're seeing it when we see it. It's very like stoner type of thing to bring up, but it's like unbelievably foundational. And yeah, I mean, I kind of had a sense that it would be wild, but then all of these things, when they're taken as something that you experience in your body as like the seer, like now you can see unmediated. Now you don't have to spend special amounts of money on lenses that actually can support your sight, like all of these different like interstices. It's just wild. I mean, so yes, I did have an idea, but I didn't think it would be this crazy. And it's something I'm thankful for every day.
Wow. And so this is in some ways at the base, kind of conceptually, of this record. And you mentioned actually in the text that key to this record were your 2022 commission and 2023 residency at Roulette. So
yes,
yeah, tell me about like what are the memories from that residency? I don't know how long you were there on residency. What are the memories that stick out to you when you think back over that time at Roulette?
So the residency at Roulette, it kind of just means that you have a very generous stipend and 2 concerts. And so
right.
Like it's not like you get to work there every single week or something. Like it's just you're in residence, but the work that you do is separate from that amazing building and those amazing people.
Gotcha.
They just kind of give you free reign, which, you know, is something that I didn't know when I was looking at that and being like, it'd be so cool to be a resident one day. Like, I kind of thought that you would just be hanging out with like Jim Staley and nope. But I mean, you are, but he was kind of floating around, but it wasn't like that. Like I wasn't talking about the kitchen or whatever, like the way that I thought. But I mean, it was just an incredible generosity that they showed me because it was a surprise. Whenever I've tried, this is going to go in a bunch of different directions before it goes where I want it to go. But I think a lot about this quote from this interview in the New York Times from Ween, where Dean Ween is like, we never tried to do anything. Because I think the interviewer was like, so did you ever expect to like be on Elektra or like be famous or whatever? And they were just like, we didn't try. Like, we just like,
right.
Music. They kind of failed upward. And of course, there's like a lot of privilege in that and a lot of luck and like the mysteries of 90s alternative radio popularity. But you know, I didn't try to get the residency. Like or maybe unconsciously I was making the right connections for it. But I literally received an email from Jim that was written maybe like 5 sentences max in it. That was like, do you want a commission? We would like you to do this. Here's the money that you get.
Whoa.
And I was like coming back I was just tubing with my then partner, Richard, who was the person who realized the visuals for the album and there was live projections in both concerts. So it was just kind of this accidental, like, holy smokes, like I've never had enough money to use the musicians, like use that large of a group for my compositions. And I wouldn't have been able to even consider it, even though I've always wanted to write a larger scale work. They made everything possible, but I didn't like try for it in this weird way, which makes it feel even holier. Like, oh, hey, here's the thing that you're about to experience, because I don't think I had gotten it yet. And I was trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. And then I got LASIK and I couldn't stop writing about it.
Wow. And tell me a bit about the band you're playing with here. So I was listening to this record. Obviously, I've heard it a bunch of times now, but specifically today, I was kind of like letting my attention drift over all of the players in turn. And it turns out that they're all wonderful. Like, they're really fucking great. So how did you... This may, again, be this may end up being like a long question or a long answer to this question, but how did you end up with this band, and what was it like kind of stepping into this, as you say, like large-scale ensemble terrain with them?
Yeah, I mean, as you know from the albums we're about to talk about, like, it's not as large scale as some others, but
right, yeah.
But because I had the funds, I just thought about like what kind of ensemble that I've always wanted to be in, and a guiding light for me when I was conceiving of that ensemble, Monder III, and he was just a brilliant trombonist and composer, and so I really wanted trombone and vibraphone and a second horn, but I may have wanted it to be a saxophone at some point, but I was playing a lot with Chris Williams. And I just had this dream of like this specific kind of late 60s, early 70s, like free bop thing. Because I always thought that the songs that I wrote, no matter what they were kind of jazz songs. You know, I come so deep from that tradition and kind of owe my whole harmonic conception and its development to being interested in jazz at like a all too early age. So I was thinking, like, what if I made that really explicit? Because Auto, which is the songs record that I had made in a more band way prior, was produced like a singer-songwriter kind of experimental one, but still a singer-songwriter record. And then the one immediately after it, or the ones after it, were like either totally solo or like with a banjo or like a flute kind of thing like that. So I wanted it to have a more classically jazz instrumentation. Whether or not the music really is that, I think it might be. But the band, it was all just people that I'd either wanted to play with or had started playing with, and they were just around New York or friends, or I wanted to be their friend, and I thought this could be a cool way to make them my friend. Kind of situations. Hiring people, paying them money so that they could be your friend. Oh no, why did I say that? It's really, don't even cut that, it's so funny. Anyway, yeah. To explain each person, though, I had originally had Patricia Brennan on Vibes, but she got COVID a day before. Oh, shit. And so I know it was awful. I felt so bad for her, and she's just such a titan, and I really, really wanted to hear her voice on this, And, on my senior recital at Eastman, amazingly enough, I had played with the bass player who's on this, who's like a very reputable kind of genius bass player around town called Tyrone Allen. And I thought another person on my senior recital at Eastman is Andrew Lynx, who's one of the great piano players I've ever met. He's the only person I've ever met who has transcribed Alan Holdsworth for keyboard and made it sound as cool as Alan Holdsworth on guitar.
Wow.
And he learned all the music in a day, So he played it that night, and then we recorded it a few days later. So he kind of hopped in, and he's just a legend for not just that, but his approach to rehearsing. I mean, he's just such an expansive musician, because it's not just his dexterous, like classic piano playing, but his work on synthesis is just really unique and special. And then the horns are Zechariah El-Magarbel, who's an unbelievable composer and just a trombone player who has that kind of dusky, specific, like broad but really soft thing that I heard in Grishan's music. And Chris Williams, who every note he plays just sounds like the truth. He's a trumpet player. I just don't understand how he just walks around and sounds like that. Like, I play guitar like I talk, which is busily, and he plays trumpet like he talks, which is nicely. And and then Booker, I'd always wanted to play with him because I was such a big fan of his improvising and the breadth of his practice. Because the other thing about all these musicians is they don't just do one thing, and I don't think many people do. Like, Chris plays with like Pink Sifu, but he also plays with like unbelievable improvisers every day, and he's in HXH, I guess is how you say it, with Lester, who I'm in a band with, and he does so many broad things, and Andrew's doing a million things, and Booker is kind of like that because he'll play with Horse Lords, and then he has a solo thing, and then he has this duo with Liesel, and just there's a breadth to his practice and a transparency to the quality of his drumming that I really wanted to spotlight. So it's just people I wanted to listen to,
I want to ask a couple of specific questions about the pieces too. So HM, which came out as the second single recently. So I understand that this was one that you wrote back in 2016. Yes. How did that end up coming back? I mean, did you perform it back then? Like, how did it end up coming back? Was there a reason that it was right now and, fitted better now, or yeah?
I don't exactly know why it came roaring back into the consciousness, but I did want a piece that was going to give the other musicians more breath than I thought that some of the compositions I had already written for the suite specifically were able to. And so I think I just always loved that line, and I knew that these people could do a really good job on it. And also, maybe let's make this this podcast exclusive, but like HM is part of a suite that I wrote for my like graduate recital from NEC. And it was kind of like about like tarot imagery, and so it stands for Hanged Man. And so there's this waiting element of it, because like I think that when you're stuck in this stasis of somebody dangling, and there's all these inferences to like that image that I really didn't think were relevant to this project, and also like really not that relevant to the piece itself, but the image of something that's stuck while everything's moving around it is a lot of how it feels, I think, when you're like honing in on your own perspective, like of sight, where like if you look at one thing and you're in a fixed place, it looks one way, but then the angle shifts even if you move 1 millimeter, in one direction. I wanted to find a piece that could do that, and I already had that in the archive, and I was like, that feels right.
Nice. And the other piece I wanted to ask about, which is related, but after Image, so I was really listening through today, like, to the structure of this one, because it's got such a wicked structure. It feels very vivid. It generally feels very visual, this specific piece. It feels like it's kind of like dismantling, and then when it reassembles, you end up with what, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like a kind of fragmented or augmented reprise of that HM line, which is so interesting that it almost goes to like nothing, and then when it comes back, it's that line again. It's very cool. But this is I'm trying to round this into a question. I mean, what can you tell me about, it's the longest piece on the record, what can you tell me about how you approached structuring that piece?
Well, that was a piece that I wrote specifically for the second concert of it. I knew I wanted to record more for the record because the suite that I had written was an hour long, which obviously doesn't fit well on a record. And so I wanted to have another piece that would be at the center of that specific concert and be the length roughly of a side of an LP. So I kind of was like, okay, Eisenberg, long form. Let's go long. And I've been practicing writing long songs, like not jazz long songs, but trying to write like Roy Harper length songs or whatever, just to see if I could do it. And I didn't feel like I wanted to do it with lyrics, but I wanted it to have the level of structure that a song with lyrics might. And I had written this kind of almost like lounge jazz thing to start it out, and realizing that it had so many of the same like intervallic specificities as set a course and all that. It felt like it was between harmonically set a course and HM by the time I had written that thing. So it felt almost like here's this language that's been developed throughout the suite. Also, something that's at the core of, I think, most people's work, but specifically work about sight, is how you remember what you've seen. And there's a level of sight and memory where things get distorted. I just think a lot about how in the Bart book on photography, Camera Lucida, like he talks all about this photo of his mother, but he doesn't show you it, you know? And it's this like kind of glaring absence, but it's all constituted by how he remembers it. And I wanted to kind of make the remembering of something literal, where like here we have this jazz thing that works on the level of a sign because we understand it's like loungy and blah, blah, blah. And it becomes kind of like the evolved history of jazz in a truncated way, where all of a sudden we're kind of quoting The All-Seeing Eye by Wayne Shorter in that chorale. And then it goes to that nothingness, which, because the best thing to me about like just loving jazz or whatever, creative music, all of it, like I love the sound of the room in classic jazz recordings. And so when it goes to nothing, it's because it's that. Like I want it to be like a drummer setting up, and then whatever happens when you listen to something so deeply is you almost remember something completely irrelevant. And like, yeah, HM is completely like theoretically relevant to the rest of the harmonic stuff going on. But the idea of it almost being like, oh, is that ever going to come back? So what else might come back?
Yeah, right.
Like, what am I, like, you can't just see everything for the first time every day. I mean, you could, because we all love being there, but it's kind of that, it was that inquiry that's like what determined the form. And also it's just to teach a lot of people who are very busy a long form piece, kind of hard. So, you know, maybe going back is a little economical for your time. So that's every reason I can give.
Nice, that's great. I loved it because it took me a while to fully recognize that it was repeating that line, because I think that's the other thing with memory with music or something like this, is that you can't be sure what you heard before and what you're hearing now and how they compare unless you do some like very deliberate scrubbing back and forth, you know. So that kind of delay means that you're just having to second guess whether or not you're re-evoking the original accurately enough to be like, oh yeah, this is a repeat, or whether, I don't know, you're just trying to kind of superimposing that similarity on it. I don't know. There's something about the way you construct that melody as well. It's a very slippery thing. And so it kind of leads itself to all these kind of sort of illusory effects as well, I think.
I mean, I just think of it as like and forgive my horrible French pronunciation here, but like it's like a lazy man's like Le Mouton de Panurge by Chevsky, where it's like that piece where it's like one unbroken line, and you're supposed to do it like the first note and then the first and the second and then first and third and first and fourth, and you just get lost, and like the point is kind of to get lost. So you kind of understand the psychology of your band with a line like that, even though it's not played like that. It's literally just played all the way through. But the horn players will have to breathe at some point, you know? So
right, yeah.
that creates like one thing. A drummer can't do all of those specific pitches, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wendy, the record is phenomenal. I will put a link in the show notes so that people can bask in it as I have. It's so good. So people,
Thank
please
you so much.
do
I'm
check
so
it
glad
out.
you like it.
It's a stormer. So
Whoa.
let's move.
I've never heard that one before. That's really nice.
That's probably got a bit of British flair, that adjective. But yes, let's go to some records by other people. So you've picked 3 important albums. One question I like to ask at this point is about how you thought about the word important when picking your list of records. So was there a way that you understood important in order to come up with the list that you did?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about it kind of telescopically, where I was like, what's important to the world? And then like, what's important to the world in another way? And then what's important to the way that I see the world?
Wow.
So it's like, I know, it sounds very highfalutin to put it that way. And I really think that when I was sitting down to choose them, probably the underlying thought was, what's important to me? But when I looked at it, I was like, no, these are like important. The first 2 are important to the world. And the second one, I think should be important to the world, but it's so foundational to how I write that I can't help but be like how I hear all music.
Wow.
So,
okay,
yeah.
that's so interesting. I don't think anyone's taken that approach before. That's cool. So
What do people normally do?
I think people like importance to the world is kind of I think often the sort of last consideration, but obviously it's in there, right? Because I don't know, it feels relevant. It can't just be one that's begins and stops with you and your own connection with it. So yeah, it's just nice to hear it kind of listed as the first thing that came to your mind. That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't know if you had a order in mind. Is there one that you wanted to go with first?
I think you should choose.
Okay, they are in an order on my sheet. I don't know whether that order is significant. I probably just wrote them down like this, but let's go for it. Let's see what happens. So to begin with, I've got Mary Lou Williams, Black Christ of the Andes. So yeah, maybe to begin with, give me a little introduction as to why this one is important to you.
Well, I think that Mary Lou Williams is like probably the most important musician to me when I think about her trajectory and when I think about what I love about composition and what it's capable of, and what I think of what she did just like as a figure in the music, as a woman, as a Black woman, and just the way that she was at the core of everything. Like she was at the core of all these genres and jazz. She was part of every single era, you know, and she says that in the Marion McPartland piano jazz session that she does with her. Like, it's insane. Like, she was in the swing, all of these eras. But there's this period in the mid to late 50s where she quit. And I've been kind of like a pet obsession that I've even like written this thing that will maybe never see the light of day, but I kind of wanted to, is quitters. I like people who like question how perpetual a career in the arts is. Like they put their lives on the line to quit. You know, I think because in the process of composition or any art making, you have to step back from the canvas or the mix or whatever to see what it is you're doing, if you care to see what it is you're doing when you're doing it. And one of the fun things about improvisation is you don't necessarily always have to care about doing that, because that's sometimes the audience's role, but that's a more expansive way of considering like perspective on a piece. But Mary Lou Williams, who had already been part of like the entire foundation of jazz and was like the source for so many theoretical advancements and like the harmonic and arrangement structures, she took this break, converted to Catholicism, kind of disappeared from public life for a second, and then was so inspired by the canonization of Martin de Porres in 1962, who's the patron saint of those who seek racial harmony. She was so inspired by him and so connected to her church that she wrote this mass. And it's so holy and so harmonically revolutionary, because I don't want to just give like a history of it, but I just sort of did. But all of the sounds on it it's so incomplete, All of the sounds on it are just so shocking. It's like as shocking and as forward-thinking as something like Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, which I heard for the first time when I was like 14 and was like, why is Radiohead ripping this off? Or like,
right, yeah.
There's all of these things that are just so foundational to our understanding of revolutionary jazz harmony, and I feel like you can hear all of them at their finest point and all in service of God, and specifically like, I don't know, this new saint. Like, it's this reason for creating something that's abstract and advanced that is based so much in her spirituality, and it comes after like a long, for her, period of not making music publicly. And so there's something that I see as so inspiring about that. Like, she didn't just keep grinding or whatever. She like sat and she thought about what required devotion in her life. And the sound of the devotion is in no way conservative, but it always swings. Which it's just an unbelievable tension, I just think it's like, formally, it's just so perfect. It's just a perfect piece of music for humans.
Do you recall how you first heard it?
So when I went to Eastman, my job was working in the library, and I would just like kind of do it to, forgive me, but like steal all the CDs and like bring them onto my computer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I would just like be working after class, like phoning in whatever, and then just jamming music. And the first time I heard it was then. But I think I was hearing all this crazy stuff back then that the way that I would listen was like, I was like, whoa, that's crazy. And then kind of like let it be. And then I was playing a lot of music with Allison Miller in 2021, 2022. And we made this record that I really hope comes out soon, because it's so freaking amazing. Like, I love that record. But it's unreleased yet. But when we were doing all that work together, we played a duo show up in Harlem, and there was a Q&A thing afterward, and she talked about that record and how like criminal it was that people didn't talk about it so much. And by that point, I'd become a really huge fan of her record Zoning, and the Zodiac Suite is just such a legendary thing. And I'd just been studying some of her smaller group arrangements from earlier in her career, and Allison saying that was just, I was like, oh, I gotta go back to this. And then I listened to it and I was just like on the floor. Like, it's so soulful. And one of the things in Viewfinder that I really wanted to do was emphasize how deeply blues is at the core of all interesting harmony. And I make it the most explicit, something like In the Pines. But every other tune on this record is like either the most gorgeous chorale or mass or crazy arrangement for a large ensemble you can imagine, or then it's like a bluesy swing thing, and both of them sound as like heavy and earthly and like light and hardcore. I don't know. And I just wanted to mention to her with this, some of the mass like nature of this piece, because she did this thing that I think everyone should try to do, just like make the holy understandable, like not understandable in a way that could ever be spoken, but like, approachable.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated by this quitting thing as well, because I guess some of it's quite specific to her being a woman too, right? You hear so many of these like seminal composers who, I think of Eliane Radigue, who like took off, I think like 2 decades to raise a family, and then just came back and was just immediately making amazing music again. Right. I'm curious to hear more about that kind of period of absence and how you think about it. Like, is it something that, I don't know, in your head you're like, at one point I'll just take a bunch of time off and then come back? Is that maybe partly why it holds such a why it's so compelling to you?
I think it's compelling because I've never felt allowed to, which is very stupid.
Right.
Because like that's just it's an unquestioned thing, yeah, you know? I think there's this fear, especially it's funny too because this is one of the larger scale releases, which is an absurd thing to say about a piece I wrote when I released something that Morton Feldman wrote. So what a stupid lucky thing. But anyway, like this is like one of the larger, like more involved releases that I've put out since 2020. And you know, that feels like a long time. But then I think about how many other tiny things I felt like I had to do and that I really wanted to do. Like I do what I want to do. I'm very lucky. But, you know, there's this like idea of being persistent that's at the core of what we think like a career in the arts requires. And I think it's worth questioning from time to time if that's useful. And I think the interest in Quitters came to me because I was like, why do I feel so obligated? Like, what is so important to me about being interpolated or like understood as an artist that requires me to work this tirelessly when like all of the best work I do is when I'm in that like Dean Ween state of like not trying. But then, you know, you think about it and Radigue raising a family and taking that break is just maybe her making music in a way that's less legible to people. Because like every movement that we do with every other person is on the level of relationship, which is basically all intervals or rhythm or whatever are.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And it feels particularly salient in her music as well, just because, you know, she was never one to rush things anyways. So that kind of extended pause feels like just, perfect segue. You also mentioned something which I'm going to attempt to repeat back, but I'm going to fudge it because you articulated it really beautifully, which was something to do with channeling the holy. Is that something that you feel like that you've engaged with in your music too?
I mean, I don't think I've been as explicit about it as a mass, you know, like
right.
But I do feel for me, not just the results, like in the sense of I now have a suite that I can talk to a very nice person about on a podcast, but like the everyday music making that we have to do to me has always felt like prayer. And that's what's kept me in it this long. I wouldn't say that what I do is close to the level of, I don't know, self-abnegation or like, it's not genuinely monastic. Like I like to hang in a way that doesn't feel like how monks like to hang, but there's,
right.
But there's something very central to me about the spirit, and I do believe in God, and I do think that what I'm trying to do is make what's communicable about the spirit in a non-visual sense, especially available, you know. And so that's something it's not something that I'm like taking explicitly from this record, though I do think it's modeled perfectly by it. I think the devotion that you hear in somebody like Mary Lou Williams it'll just be different than what I can do.
Yeah.
It's also related more to a tradition than what I'm willing to reveal about my own beliefs. But I think that for me, all music making is prayer, and it's all an attempt to get into something close to the divine. And I hear a lot of that in really radical music from like the late 50s on, especially. Like people make explicit this link between improvisation and holiness. And I think finding that record where it's made that explicit made it even more legible and even more important that I keep on that path.
I can't imagine that this has a static answer, but I wanted to ask about a favorite track, but I can imagine this may be an album where different tracks protrude at different times, right? I was listening today, and Dirge Blues, actually, I was listening to just before I spoke to, and I was like, wow. Like, just acoustically, this is gorgeous. The way that the instruments are kind of intermingling on that one is stunning. So do you have a favorite track? Is it something where different tracks protrude on different occasions for you? Yeah, what does that look like?
I mean, look, Dirge Blues absolutely rips. I can't believe that on this record she has a song called "A Fungus Among Us,"
right?
Which, even if it's great, like I mean, come on, it's pretty undeniable. But Saint Martin de Porres is like the song track one. It always feels so embarrassing how often the first track is the track I like the best, even though I usually listen to an album like 7 times before I can say that I've actually listened to it. Like, I promise I've heard more than that, but like that song is just unbelievable, and the vocal arrangement on it is like hugely influential to me and probably to anyone who hears it. But and then sometimes I listen to Anima Christie and I'm just like feeling it, you know. So I don't know. It's all perfect. I love her cover of "It Ain't Necessarily So." I mean, talk about doubt. You're right. You know, it is cyclical. You listen to the album and what shows up, shows up.
And one last question on this one. Like, when you think back of your memories associated with, like, discovering this record or listening to this record, what kind of experiences come to mind, like, in terms of, you mentioned the library, so maybe it's going to be there, but, like, where are you when you're listening to this? Like, what's the vibe?
I think I'm up in Harlem hanging out with Richard because we both got really into it. You know, there's that element of it where it's kind of a guiding light of how Viewfinder. It's not like in any way literally a parallel, but there's a lot of influence there. Yeah, I mean, it's more when I think about this record, I'm not really taken to places that are like directly right near me or anything. Like I feel like I'm in the landscape of each tune. Like the first one, I feel like maybe I'm hearing it in a church, but I'm actually hearing it on some other plane. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel earthly to me. And the other 2 records that I brought up, like I can point to things I think that are way more normal. Like I remember them from my life, but with this record, it feels kind of unearthly to me, even though it sounds earthy.
Wendy, let's go to your second important record then. Shall I pick this one too?
Yeah, I love it when you pick.
All right, let's go for Robert Wyatt, Old Rotten Hat. So again, if you could give me a little introduction as to why this one's important to you, that would be fab.
I'd always loved Robert Wyatt. I loved his voice. I loved Soft Machine and Hatfield in the North and stuff. But like I don't know. Robert Wyatt when he's alone, it's pretty cool. It's also unbelievably communist and like politically really angry in a way that doesn't sound like the normal level of political anger that I've also liked in other musicians. I mean, this record shares that, I feel like, with the Minutemen, where their version of political anger isn't like, I'm really mad. It's like,
right, yeah.
Hey, did you know this?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Yeah, I just think it's really cool that like he became a communist in the 80s and was like, I was missing out on all of this? Oh my God. And then, isn't that wild? I mean, this compilation thing, like we're like Work in Progress and Nothing Can Stop Us. Like that whole era of him like alone using like the top part of the drum set, obviously, and the beautiful drum programming that he does, and then the synths. I mean, and that perfect trumpet voice. I mean, I feel like Chris kind of sounds like him in his phrasing, you know. But yeah, it's my favorite Robert Wyatt. It's really funky. It's really angry. It's really sexy. That song Alliance that starts it off is like surprisingly really hot. And I feel like a lot of the music that I write uses pretty similar like voice leading stuff. Things it's like ultra chromatic in a way that doesn't feel like it's trying to school you on anything. And I feel like people don't like it, which is stupid and makes me like it even more.
Oh, really? Is that the vibe? Like, is this kind of like a one that gets pushed to the side a bit in his canon? I
don't know, actually. I don't know why I said that. I think people come to Robert Wyatt for a million different reasons, like genius singing, perfect melodies, all that. But I feel like they don't usually come to him for like political messaging. And in the 80s, he was really obsessed by it. And for me, like, just as much as I feel like the music I make is very holy and communicates that, like, I feel like it's also really political. Like, I think In the Pines is extremely political, and it's about occupation, And I don't want to say much more about that, or I do, but I shouldn't for family reasons. But like, but I feel like there's something so brave in this record, and people would rather hear him be really like bummed out experimentally on like Rock Bottom, which I think is a perfect record also. But like, I think that record's unbelievable, and anything that features Ivor Cutler like that has my heart forever. But like,
oh my God,
there's something so alone in this. It's so different. It's so alone, and it's so mad, and yet it doesn't sound stupid. And when I'm alone and I'm mad, I sound really stupid, and so I have a lot of envy.
Yeah, I liked his quote. I think this is from him, where he was like, "This record's a conscious attempt to make unmisusable music," which is so great because that specificity of the political energy means that it's not going to get co-opted in a way that like Radiohead singing about people power could be. He's like, no, this is very much about this event, and this is precisely how I feel about it, which is great. Yeah,
it is great, and it's frank, which is like my favorite quality in music, is when you can do someone just being totally honest.
Yeah, and not really within like a sonic context that I kind of expect to hear it, right? So I mean, I don't know, there's plenty of like hardcore punk where you could go and hear lots about police abolition, but in a quiet record like this, I guess that ties in with the loneliness or like the loneness rather that you're talking about, where he's just telling you rather than screaming it. He's just kind of like quite wryly singing about it in hushed tones, which, yeah, it sounds a bit like, to me, it almost sounds like I don't know. There's like a keyboard warrior sort of energy to it because he's just on his own. And obviously this predates any of that, but
I can't believe you just used that phrase. It's so true. Wow. Damn it.
Yeah.
Whoa. I don't know why that hit so hard for me, because it's true and it's surprising and it's so true. Yeah, no, it sounds like that. He's like, hey, this is really fucked up. And I think that, it could be really easy to hear that and be like, this is an album of performative activism. And I think that like, that's more or less what like Christgau said on his like review. He's like, don't preach. Here, I'm going to pull it up because it's so, he says like, don't insult the genocide in East Timor with minimalist obscurantism, and don't preach to the converted until you've made more converts. But the thing is, I've met enough like Republipunks like in my life that like if you're ahead, like just because you're ahead doesn't mean you have like good politics or care about other people. And so like to hear music that's unabashedly made by somebody who just loves music, that's this political, that sounds like his awakening. It's like a step on the political awakening like timeline thing that like is audible and pretty rarely heard. Which is like the quiet mulling of like, holy shit, this actually is fucked up. How do I face this without hopelessness?
Yeah, for sure. Like that. Oh god, that Christgau thing's irritating because it's that classic thing of like, you got to do it in the right way if you're doing that kind of business, which is just basically trying to
make sure no one does anything.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I also really love about this album is like he doesn't. It's not like any album really necessarily would have room for this, but like he doesn't pretend that like he knows more than you.
Right.
He's just showing you in the way that he knows how that this is fucked up, and he knows that people who will listen to him because he's got this bizarre, amazing career where like the people who listen to him, and he's like, hey, I found out this is really fucked up. Have you been thinking about this?
Right.
And it's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think it lends into that sense that sometimes you're made to feel like you should know more, and there's a greater level of complexity that you're not considering. If you're nailing your colours to the mast so like severely, it's like, well, maybe you need more information. But I think also, I guess the minimal production leans into this, where it's like what you see is precisely what's happening, and it's not like there's some hidden layers you need to understand. It's very disarming in that sense.
It is, and it's intimate in a way that I feel like a lot of political work likes to pretend it isn't. And I feel like that's especially notable because it's like by a dude.
Right.
And like obviously he's like a dude who's faced like an unbelievable life. Like I feel like a lot of similarly quiet political records are feminists, like explicitly. Mm-hmm. And because that's like how we let women be radical, is by being quiet in a way that we think that we're being let in on, which is why something like the Raincoats are so deep. It's like they do that and they don't do that and they really don't do that and they do that. But like here's this person that's being quiet and that's being intimate and playing these bossa novas, these like hypnotic, like unbelievable melodies. Like Garbzadegi is like the best song I've ever heard. That should be one that I make these kids transcribe, my God. But like, that song just sounds unbelievable, and it's not trying to convince you of anything. It's just telling you the way that like, I feel like not many lyricists do that well outside of like, I guess, Northern England or something. I feel like that's what I love about folk music. It's like, this guy died. And you're like, okay. And I feel like he's like that, but about like broader political things.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that your favorite track?
Oh man, I mean, probably, but like Age of Self bangs also. East Timor is like a hot beat. Like I think about lyrics from United States of Amnesia all the time. British Road. I mean, it's really just cool music that I like. Like I can't think about tracks of that one either, because to me, like, it's so vivid as like a record that gleams. But probably Garbzadegi. I mean, I definitely played that on repeat, and there's an amazing live version on YouTube that I watch all the time.
That's another one actually that Tom York has ripped off. There's a very, very overt reference to it on the last Smile album.
Oh man, I have not listened to the last Smile album. I'm just gonna out myself here.
Oh well, so Friend of a Friend, like the chorus of it, I think is basically the same chord progression, but just swung.
Okay, typing it in. Whoa, the back of his head in the official video looks ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad that people are ripping off Robert Wyatt. In a way. Like, I'm glad because maybe we'll someday make people listen to Robert Wyatt. It's like how you can really love a Big Thief song and then hope that the people who are listening to her are also listening to Townes Van Zandt, Right,
exactly. It's got to have a ripple going backwards somehow, hasn't it?
I think it will. I mean, I think a lot of Zoomers are heads because they have the internet.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah. So, I wonder what memories you had associated with this one in terms of listening to it. Whether anything kind of specific comes up for this one. All good if not, but do you imagine, or do you remember yourself being in a specific place when you think about your experiences listening to this?
Yeah, so for a year I lived in a town called Northfield, Massachusetts, which was really far out there. It was off 91 broadly, but like kind of on the tri-state border between New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts, which is like no one really goes there on purpose. And I had like a screaming deal on rent, and I was living there and just thinking a lot. And there's a school, like a very fancy boarding school called Northfield Mount Herman, where my roommate was working, which is why we had the rent deal, because he was like in faculty housing. And I just like took some extra rooms in there, like multiple, which is crazy. And that campus had moved, and so there was like an abandoned old campus of this like fancy boarding school, and I lived there for 1 year, and I would just walk around the abandoned campus of that thing, like in this tiny ass town all of the time, and I would jam it, especially in the winter. And my friend Shane, I like loved Robert Wyatt for a long time, but my friend Shane was like, had you ever heard this one? I used to listen to it a lot when I was in college in the winter, and just, I always think about Garbsadegi when I'm trudging up a snowy hill. So I kind of borrowed his and did that, and it fit like a glove.
That abandoned boarding school sounds crazy. What the hell?
Yeah, it was.
Whoa.
What the hell?
Yeah, like
it's not like you're in college too. It's crazy.
Man, just to go around, like, just shuffling around corridors listening to music as well must have been... Man, there must be surely like a bunch of records that you can kind of pin to that time, that place.
Yeah.
Wow.
For me, it's funny because the records that I chose, I wouldn't even know if I chose them, but like I was listening to that, and I was listening to White Bread, Black Beer all the time.
Wow.
Yeah. And a lot of Radigue actually at that time, because it was so quiet there that it just felt kind of perverse to listen to music most of the time. And so sometimes I would want to listen to this, like the Holy Spirit or whatever, you know?
Yeah. So, should we go to your last record, Wendy? Is there anything else you wanted to say about Robert Wyatt, or?
If you're not listening to him most weeks of your life, you should be. And if you are, I love you.
Nicely done. Cool. The very final important album that you picked is by Theo Blackman and Ben Monder, No Boat, released in 1997. So, yeah, as before, give me a little introduction as to why this one's important to you.
You like to start? Here's the thing. I put No Boat, but I could have easily put the other duo record from around that time.
Uh-huh.
I love these two together. They share one mind. I can't believe that they're real. And when I feel like, okay, the reason that I was like hesitating on the intro is that I realized a couple years ago that every time I'm trying to write a song, specifically one that is exploiting like a texture of finger picking, or like really working with my right hand, it's just because I'm trying to write like how Ben Monder and Theo Blackman play together. So like I'm trying to think, the first thing I heard of the duo was from their record At Night, which is like a decade later, which is my favorite like of theirs. But the one I listened to more was No Boat, because I just was like, I heard it, I think around the time I was working in the libraries, but maybe before then. And I never heard somebody approach jazz guitar specifically with like the broadness. And like, let's put it this way. Monder's right hand is more developed than like most jazz guitar players' right hands. And most jazz guitar players' right hands are the most developed. Mm-hmm. You know, there's something to the way that he has like such freedom with his picking patterns, and yet they sound very his. Like I know that he loves Egberto Gismonti. I know he's coming from like a specific kind of Brazilian tradition and in some of the right hand stuff. And I also know that he's coming from like other crazy neoclassical classical composers for guitar. Like I can see a lot of the lineage in it, but to me it always sounds like he's breathing, even if it's something that I can't imagine anyone else being physically able to play. And then whenever he's playing and Theo Blackman is singing, it sounds like how I want to be as one person. Like I want to be able to do both of those things as well at the same time. And to me, like the fact that it's two people becoming one, it's like, it doesn't sound like they're becoming one. It's not like the Spice Girls song or whatever. It's just, there's something to the way that they each approach music as this like, here's something foundationally incredibly difficult that nevertheless we're going to drench in like an absolutely criminal amount of delay. And that's okay because it's what we like. It feels kind of as alone as Old Rotten Hat. I don't understand his political or religious point of view, and I don't care because it sounds like how I want to sound.
I've seen you mention about Ben Monder before in a separate interview. Maybe this was with Tone Glow where you mentioned like that at a certain point you wanted to be like Ben Monder style guitar player at some point, and then that was almost part of a trajectory where at some stage you were like, oh, there's kind of a dead end to trying to imitate these people. I mean, you kind of explained this, but what is it that you wanted to kind of like channel into your own playing that Ben Monder was doing?
Well, the thing that I had to reject at that time, which I think saying that in that Tone Glow interview was the thing that led me to realize I was always trying to write like him, is this kind of athletic thing. Because like part of the holiness or like the almost spiritual devotion that I was feeling in music was from the act of practicing every day for a very long time, which I don't, this is embarrassing after all that holy talk earlier, but I don't practice every day. And I'm sorry, get off my back, but I don't. But when I did, it was because I wanted to feel the kind of fluency that I heard in his thing, which you can only really understand. You can only really hear that when it's external to you. And so I would just like be so perfectionist and just be practicing and practicing and practicing and trying to get better and better and better and more fluent,
Yeah.
for so long. And that's the thing that I had to abscond with, not Monder's language, which to me was always about like really radical harmony and like really natural execution of like bizarre subdivisions within like a hand pattern,
When you say that you can only really perceive that fluency when it's external to you, do you mean because you are perceiving someone else playing and, I don't know, don't so much know what they weren't able to say, or the kind of inner wobbles that they were having?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. Like, I've heard Ben Monder playing like normal jazz, and it's amazing. And it's not like he can't do it, but there's something about his tone when he's doing his own weirdo shit that is just it's so unrepeatable. And it makes me think about like what I would have thought about him as like a jazz guitar player if that's how like his music had gotten into my life, like explicitly. But the first thing I had heard of his was Oceana. And I was like, holy shit. And then I like went back into all of it because I had never heard something that was called jazz do what that did. To like it felt like a sweep, but it was also, you could tell that at some points there was improvisational stuff, and then it kind of led me into this like the world that he was adjacent to or is adjacent to with like Matt Mitchell or Taylor Dupree or any number of these like really innovative composers who all approach ensemble work differently, But yeah, what the thing about it being external is like I have this horrible, this is like way too intimate for like a podcast, but I have this thing that I imagine other people also have, which is they see other people and then assume because they're separate from them, like the other person is separate from them. So we assume a fixity on the other person that almost makes it more understandable. And then since it's more understandable, we think it's better than maybe something that we have.
Yeah, totally.
So we're like, oh, yeah, like it's a very normal thing that somehow took me 700 words to say, but it haunts me all the time. And I think that that's what I needed to get rid of. And Ben Monder, unfortunately, was just caught in the crosshairs of me trying to explain that in that interview, which I'm almost certain he hasn't read because I'm pretty sure he doesn't know who I am. But I just I was like, this guy's like the best guitar player. He does everything on his right hand and his left hand in a way that I could never do because his hands are also gigantic and my hands really, really small, and that's why I hold the guitar like a nerd, because I want to get some of the grips that he can do, It's literally about using a triangle. Like it's so embarrassing. But there's things that like in trying to do what he does, I've learned my own voice, and then I know that there's things that like the ways that we think about music that like he wouldn't or something, So he was this like kind of guiding figure, both constitutively, like I want to do that, and both like in not being able to do that, I'm learning about what I actually,
Yeah. There are a couple of really interesting pieces in the midst of this record, which are like straight up songs. And you have Every Time We Say Goodbye right at the end. And it's really, really curious to hear like Theo in particular switch to singing words and hitting a melody that it's got such a different flavor. What do you make of those songs on the record?
I mean, that's the hook. That's why it's the important record, because it sets all of these more like wild things, like that chorale or, you know, Lake Green or whatever. Like, it sets them in relief, and you understand that all of these compositions are also songs. They're just really, really fun pieces of it. You know, I think about it like when you look at something for a long time and then close your eyes and you see the after image of it. Like, all of the music that he's making on the record, or that I say he, but it's like really a duo record. And then there's also Jim Black and Scully on it. Like, and then that, you know, that poem, the No Boat, Maxime Hunk Kingston poem that John Hollenbeck wrote. I mean, you see these songs and then you close your eyes and then what's left is like the thing that isn't the song, that is also the song.
Yeah.
That is there.
Yeah, for sure.
And I've always wanted that. Like, I always want a song to feel like it's kind of, it's tricking you, and then all of a sudden you remember it and you're like, oh, hey. You know, and I feel like this record kind of does that. Like, here's the trick and then here's a song. And then once you're done listening to it, it's just all songs.
I want to dig into that a bit because, yeah, listening to this record today, I kind of started to appreciate that a lot, where I was like listening again and I was like, oh, this is that one, or this is that one. And it seems like that they're kind of, each piece is distilling something very distinctive, but it is only really available to you in kind of retrospect. Is that kind of what you're getting at, this idea that I don't know, each one has a kind of essence which is everywhere and nowhere that you can kind of pinpoint?
Yeah. Well, I just feel like a lot of people think of openness in songs as like a harmonic or a formal attribute, but for this, they're all open, even though they're very fussy. You know? And I really relate to that as a composer because, you know, I was really, like, when I was started to just get interested in like art theory or whatever, I liked the idea in the 60s of like the viewer completing the artwork. And I feel like what these songs do is, or these pieces do, is something really similar, where it's up to you to kind of figure out how they work. I mean, it's always up to you to anything you hear works, but there's something about the density and the characteristic of space, despite that density, that's like in this record and in everything that those two do together, that you can like hear pretty clearly, you know, like as like, here's an entreatment, like the way that it feels like the way that they trust their audience to understand what's making it a song is more open than just like saying this is a song that has an open form.
On a similar thing, I saw Theo talk in an interview with 15 Questions, I believe, about kind of going back and forth as a younger musician about the superiority of, say, like improvised music or composed music, and then that resolved at some point. I can't remember the rest of that interview quote, which would have been helpful. Do I recall you kind of having a similar kind of trying to sort of pass whether your tendencies lied within, like, say, improvisation or within song form, and then, I don't know, finding a means of resolving that for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to resolve it in some way or whatever. Like, I really relate to that. I think that there's something that happens when you really love a genre and you know that the narrativization of the genre or the characteristic of it or any number of different, aspects of it feel like they would prohibit a love of something else that might be as fertile for you. I think it's hard to imagine now because everything feels like it's skirting genres. Like things that feel very in a genre feel very like they're part of a micro universe, and I don't really understand, or I can't tell if people still care about that. Like everything feels cross genre to me when I look around, and I think that that's beautiful. But when I was learning jazz, it didn't feel that way. And I actually had a very toxic mentor say, like, if you really want to get good at jazz, you should like stop focusing on everything else and like start getting really into it. And I like did, Yeah. And he also said stuff like you should, because you don't have like a real voice, like the way that real singers do. So you should like just, play guitar because you're better at it. Like he was a horrible mentor in every possible way. But, hearing that and then being like, well, I love country music.
Right.
And, Tony Williams sings, and he's not like a classically brilliant singer, but he's the best singer who ever lived. I really think that. So what am I supposed to do? So I do relate to whatever it is that Theo said about it,
And then a last question on this one is again about whether you had any memories, experiences connected with this record and your times listening to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to this record a lot in college, and so I think about it as sort of like a consciousness thing. When I was like 20, I was listening to this and like learning the Bach's Chaconne on guitar like this summer and just like jamming it over and over again and being like, I really can sense that there's a relationship here. What is it? Can I actually play that relationship physically? Like, am I able to do it? Like, I remember it being kind of formative that way. But really, the one that's interesting is like listening to No Boat a lot, and then listening to Late by Myself, which is from At Night, which is the duo record of just kind of those two, sort of. And seeing that there was like this relationship to songs that developed between those records particularly. Like, they do a cover of Norwegian Wood on that record, and like Sunny Sunday by like on the other record.
Wow.
The Joni Mitchell song Sunny Sunday. Yeah, it's kind of like I maybe should have put At Night, honestly, but like thinking about like the relationship between that record and like those songs that are from a pop tradition, and then this one that has Out of This World and Every Time We Say Goodbye on it.
Yeah.
And like how grew in that decade. So it's kind of like less about how formative this record was, because I really jammed it like every day for a while, and more about like it being formative and then pushing me once I was even more into At Night, being like, wait, I could write like that.
Yeah. Wow, I'm gonna check out that Norwegian Wood cover. I'm very curious.
It's great. It's amazing. We love it. But honestly, the Sunny Sunday, like the cover of that Joni Mitchell song is like more fucked up. It's more beautiful than, I mean, Norwegian Wood is great. It's perfect. The title track, or not the title track, the first song, because that's all I ever like, of At Night. It's kind of it's the start for me. I've been like learning it, which is, when you hear that, you're going to be like, okay, yeah, you've been learning it.
Wendy, so I have one more question for you, which is about how music comes into your life as a listener. So I bundle a few things together into one in this. Where do you tend to buy music? Are there formats you prefer? Where does your listening tend to take place? Yeah, let me into a bit of that.
I like CDs a lot these days, and when I was living in Western Mass, there was a record store called Turn It Up, and I bought like so many CDs and records there.
Nice.
And it wasn't the best one, because like the best record stores out there were like Feeding Tube or Electric Eye, and I got some crazy shit there for sure. But like, I mean, I feel like I can, like, you'll just find like a Randy Newman CD in like a thrift store in Pennsylvania, and it'll change your life, And so when I like buy physical media, it's either at shows and it's just because I've been floored by something and I love it, or I'm like trading with somebody who liked my thing and I fall in love with their record, or I'm like really scraping the bottom of the barrel, or I listen from the library.
Nice. I love how much the library still comes up on this podcast.
I love the library.
It's still great. I mean, it's such a specific range of music. I don't know if it's the same over there, but we have local libraries and they've got just a very, it's not necessarily stuff you'd find in, say, like an Oxfam record store or a high street record store. There's a very specific library type of album that you're going to find in that, which I like a lot. And then the last one was, where does your listening tend to take place?
I, like any city dweller, I listen a lot when I'm on the way to work, on the train or whatever, and when I'm walking around. But my partner and I just moved in together, and she listens to more music than anyone I've ever met, and she started playing it on the hi-fi. And
Uh-huh.
so she's she's like more into CDs than anyone I've ever met, and like more than most metalheads, I think. Maybe they're tied. I don't know. Whatever. So I kind of ambiently listen to what she's listening to, like in the house when she lets me in on that. But other than that, I listen to my record collection a lot, and I have really good speakers that I jam. But then sometimes I listen to like this summer I've listened to a lot less music than I normally have because I've been trying to repair my relationship to performing and hearing it, and it's required me to do a lot of like silent, or not silent because that's impossible, but like really intentional contemplation, you know, like when do I want to be listening to this? Like, am I taking it for granted? And I have this theory that sometimes when I'm listening on the way to work, I'm training myself not to really listen to music. And sometimes music just wants to be on and not listened to, and I don't know what to do about that. So I guess that's like a funny question to ask because I'm like, what do I want? You
Huh.
know?
Yeah. Okay. So when you're commuting to work, it's like you put music on, but just kind of as like an indirect thing that's kind of just there.
No, no, I try to listen to it on purpose, and like then I can stay in it, and it's not like I even get distracted, but like sometimes when I'm really tired and I'm listening to music, I feel like I'm not respecting the music.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's like nice. Like it feels a little better for me to like not listen to it, and then like when I have the brain for it, then I'm like, okay, yeah, let's go. Especially because the music I really like tends to be dense or compositionally really rich, and I want to like give it the respect. But then, I'll listen to whatever and it's on in the background, and then a little line pops out and it's the best line ever, and it's because I hadn't been listening that hard.
Right. Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's hard. But I've been in like a kind of searching state about that, and I haven't known what I've wanted, so I haven't really been like, during the school year, which starts next week for me, like I'm going to be listening to like and at least like 2.5 albums, like to and from work, depending on how long it is. So like, maybe I'll be better. But in the summer when I don't have to be anywhere in the same way, I'm like, sometimes I just go like a week straight without listening to music, which is totally heretical to admit here.
No, that sounds great. I mean, if you ever figure out like what it is that fits the bill for you, let me know, because I mean, this is a constant thing that I'm turning over in my head as to, I don't know, when I'm putting music on and it's just bouncing off my head, or worse, clogging up space that I need in order to let other thoughts and anxieties have enough space to be processed, And then there's this very convoluted composition trying to jostle for space in amongst that, and it's like, this is kind of potentially net negative, this listening experience at this moment.
It used to not bother me as much, but now it makes me unbelievably guilty. It's weird. And it's not even like I want somebody to put on like Viewfinder and be like listening to every single note and worrying about it. Like, I think quite the contrary. But sometimes I just find myself like, oh yeah, today is the day that I'm going to tackle this record. And then I listen to it and I'm like, it's like when you're a kid and you're like, yeah, I've read this book, and you just looked at it. You looked at every single page, you didn't read it. And I really, like, that's my worst fear. Like, I just want to actually experience something. And sometimes when I'm doing too many things at the same time and trying to listen, I don't. Which is why sometimes I prefer to just. This is like my old favorite. When I was listening to all of these records for the first time, this is what I used to do in my early 20s. Is I would put on an eye mask, like a blindfold, and just like jam a record lying down like a corpse in my bed. I think I might get back to doing that.
Yeah.
It's hard as a rock. So.
I see. I really want to do that again, and it's always, gosh, it's such a cliche thing, but my other senses get itchy, which is terrible because it used to be so much easier. I used to be able to lock in and find it really appealing, but I think my personal treadmill is set at too high a setting at the moment. I need to slow the fuck down.
Yeah, that's pretty normal. I mean, they're all just out here running us down, so what can we do?
Yeah, for sure. Listen, Wendy, thank you so much. Like, this has been super. I've loved asking a few questions about your record. These 3 records were awesome. Like, none of them I had really any experience with prior to you suggesting them. So
fantastic.
Yeah, I've had a wicked time with them. I'm going to carry them with me as well. Like, these are definitely albums that I'm going to come back to. So very grateful. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for being interested in them and for such a great conversation and for letting me talk as long as I had to, I guess.
You're welcome. And to everyone listening, see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.